Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review of The Walking Dead Season 6. So this video is where I give my overall review of The Walking Dead Season 6, so I have to give a spoiler warning for The Walking Dead up to all of Season 6. So I'm going to talk about all of Season 6, not just the second half, and to let you know what I think about it. But if you want more detailed reviews on The Walking Dead, you can check out my overall review for the first half of Season 6 and my individual episode reviews for the second half of Season 6. So I was very vocal about saying I felt that Season 5 was the best season the show had thus far because I felt they were finally moving at a much faster pace and focusing more on what the show does best. However, I did not feel the same way about Season 6, as I felt Season 6, they were falling right back into a lot of their tropes of having too many filler episodes where not much happened. And indeed, I would say my main complaint of the show overall is the fact that they say that they want to do this show forever, which is never a good idea, as it's better to have an end game in mind, but particularly with this show because it has already gotten very repetitive with repeating the same plot points over and over again, and I imagine the problem will only get exacerbated as the show goes on. The main issue I had with Season 6 is that it all seemed to be unnecessarily drawn out for far too long, which resulted in the show spinning its wheels and introducing a lot of filler and meaningless storylines that seemed quite irrelevant in the grand scheme of things because the showrunners decided that they wanted to wait until the Season 6 finale to introduce the next main villain, whom fans of the comic book series will tell you is the best villain that the series has ever had. So it's a big deal, and so they decided to wait until the final minutes of the last episode to introduce him, and they spent most of Season 6 teasing him, so much so that it got a little ridiculous. And therein lies the main issue, as it felt very contrived, as in the story they didn't seem to flow naturally, but instead seemed subject to some business executive schedule. The show would have been far more effective had they simply introduced Negan earlier instead of waiting so long in an attempt to draw out anticipation, and that's what I mean by the pacing in this season being really off. And of course, the other main issue with the season is that several times it relied too much on cheap gimmicks to generate hype, instead of trying to tell a great story. In fact, this season was more guilty of this than any other season. The two biggest examples of this is, of course, Glenn's supposed death and the season-ending cliffhanger, and who did Negan kill? However, there are also other smaller examples, such as the episode 15 ending when Dwight shot Daryl. But let me look a bit closer at the two big incidents. So first is the Glenn death, as it very much appeared like Glenn died, as it looked like his guts were being ripped out by zombies, and then they left audiences to believe this for several weeks, until it was revealed that Nicholas fell on top of him, and it was his guts being ripped, and Glenn slid under a dumpster for safety. So this was nothing but a publicity stunt to hype the show and added nothing to the story because no other character was there to witness and falsely believe that Clint died. So this was an in-joke aimed solely at the audience watching the show. In other words, it did not exist inside of the world of the show and therefore did not affect the characters involved, only the people watching, which renders it pretty much useless and a cheap gimmick because it was deceptive cinematography and framing that led people to believe he died. And plus, the scenario they gave that he was able to survive the situation was highly implausible and again served absolutely no purpose other than creating hype. And it worked, as it generated internet buzz like crazy, as that's the only thing anyone was ever talking about after that episode first aired. Oh my god, Glenn's dead! And part of the buzz was because people being upset that a major character died in such a cheap way. But you know what they say, any publicity is good publicity. And of course, everyone thought it was such a cheap and cheesy trick the way it was revealed Glenn survived, although some at the time were too relieved that he was still alive to care. However, some are really pushing hard for crawling under the dumpster to become a new catchphrase, kind of like jumping the shark, as a way to describe when a show does something noticeably horrible and attempt to boost ratings. And honestly, I think there's a huge chance that this could happen, as I've seen a lot of jokes about crawling under the dumpster on the net when talking about any number of shows. And then there's the Who Did Negan Kill cliffhanger, which I won't get too much into, as I did a whole video about this, and you can check that out if you're curious. Suffice to say, I think this was an even worse blunder than the Glenn's death, because this time they took the most epic and truly shocking moment from the comics, or so I hear, and completely bungled it in a lame-ass attempt to create internet buzz and get people to tune back in for season 7. I mean, that episode was good, really good. They totally had me until they did something so obviously contrived and out of place, and completely succeeded in throwing me completely out of the world of the show. I honestly think this was one of the worst endings to any TV show episode ever. And of course, the show is becoming more like 24, as they seem to be just recycling the same plot points over and over, as apparently they no longer have the balls to kill any main character, and instead will introduce new characters that no one really cares about, and then kind of explore them, and then kill them off. This was a problem in season 5 as well, but I believe it was very exacerbated here, as they set up this big romance between Rick and Jesse, and Jesse's whole family, and spent all this time making this huge deal out of this dynamic, and then promptly just killed off Jessie and her entire family in the mid-season premiere. And in the very next episode, they do a time jump of a couple of months where Rick doesn't even remember who she is and shacks up with Michonne instead, so as if she never existed. So what was the goddamn point of focusing on her for so long? There simply wasn't one. And then there were other characters like Deanna and Denise that fans start to like and seemed like they might become something interesting, but are killed off before that can happen. Meanwhile, all the main characters seem to be completely safe to a ridiculous point, such as Glenn. And the other thing is, there were certain moments of this season that everyone else seemed to love that I didn't particularly care for or thought was just alright, like the season 6 premiere with the hurting zombies, which I just could not get into this episode because there were far too many characters that I didn't care about to get involved, so I found it really hard to get invested. And in the back half of the season, the episode where Rick and Daryl encountered Jesus, I mean, this episode was okay, but I think it gets far too much credit, as the main storyline was just kind of okay. It was too much like Benny Hill to really get me that invested, and the side plots were awful. They were just useless filler. So overall, I don't think this was a good episode, and gets way too much praise. Speaking of which, although I know a lot of people agree with me on this one, but there's just as many who disagree with me on this one, that the episode where Carol and Maggie are captured by the Saviors and held prisoner was a massive disappointment and mostly pointless filler after the high-octane attack of the previous episode, and also was the beginning of them completely ruining Carol's character, as it seems so unnatural and out of place, and simply bad storytelling to take her character in such a really unnecessary direction. Plus, there seemed to be too many in-jokes aimed directly at comic book fans, particularly involving the Saviors, as they seem to want us to be all hyped for them, but they seem to be relying solely on their credibility from the comics, as what they presented on screen in the show wasn't really intriguing. Not until the season finale, at least. For example, the episode in the first half of the season where Daryl encountered Dwight was a horrible episode, and I mentioned then that this seemed to be a nod to comic book fans, to which I got a lot of responses saying that the events of this episode never occurred in the comics, but you're kind of missing my whole point. It wasn't that this episode was right out of the comics. It's that the only reason to be invested in this episode is to go, oh look, there's Dwight. Oh look, there's the Saviors. And the only way to know who these people are, or to care about who they are, is because you already know who they are from the comics. So if you don't know who they are, and therefore aren't already excited to see them, then they just come off as a bunch of lame-ass people, in this episode a complete waste of time. And indeed, through most of the back half of the season 6, the hype around the Saviors seemed to be a lot of telling instead of showing. And the only reason to be invested in them or scared of them is because you already know about them from the comics. Instead of hyping, for example, all the hyping over Negan's name, where everyone was saying, "I am Negan," seemed to rely on pre-existing understanding of who Negan is, which is nonsense, as the show should stand on its own. However, there were several things about Season 6 I really did like. I liked the Morgan episode with Eastman. It was a great piece of drama, and it was great to see how Morgan became who he was, although I thought the episode was very poorly placed, happening right after Glenn's quote-unquote death. The episode where the wolves attacked Alexandria was super intense and some of the best suspense I've seen on television. It was so awesome seeing Carol be that badass here. The mid-season finale and premiere were extremely effective, seeing Deanna sacrifice herself to save Rick, and her lessons trying to teach Rick that they are all one group, and seeing this accumulate in the mid-season premiere when the whole town came together to overcome an impossible situation was really nicely done. And plus, I really like how they're expanding the world, and it seems to be settling in as we meet Jesus and Hilltop, and at the end of the season they tease another town, which I heard from the comic book readers is called the Kingdom. And I love the storyline with Rick convincing the others to actively go after the Saviors and kill people in their sleep. It was just really brutal storytelling that was extremely effective. And before it was ruined by the god-awful cliffhanger, the finale was really great in creating very eerie and creepy horror story of Rick and the group being overwhelmed by an unbeatable foe. So that was really intense as well. So my rating for Season 6 as a whole out of 10 is a 6 good. I was debating on whether or not I should give this season a favorable rating or not, but I think it deserved one, so I'll grant it a 6, as there were a lot of great intense moments that really broke the bar of what TV can do, but unfortunately they were overwhelmed this season by weak, obvious publicity gimmicks, far too much filler, and recycled plot lines that make you wonder if the show is going anywhere or will just drag on for far too long, like 24 or Dexter, but only time can tell. So that's it for my overall review of The Walking Dead Season 6. You can check out my channel for weekly reviews on Fear the Walking Dead, as well as I'll be covering the hell out of Season 6 of Game of Thrones when that starts, as well as other shows like Better Call Saul, Vikings, Star Trek, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.